may gain something from this lesson, Father, and then apply it to our own lives, look inward to ourselves to see that if we've been found faithful in your sight. Our Father, we pray that your richest blessings be upon us all, and forgive us when we fail you. For it's in your Son's name I ask. Amen. Isaiah 58. This is an example here of Isaiah calling them to order. I'm gonna read the chapter, and we'll come back then and just talk about each bit of it individually. And I'll be reading from the CSB version. Cry out loudly, don't hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Tell my people their transgression and the house of Jacob their sins. They seek me day after day and delight to know my ways, like a nation that does what is right and does not abandon the justice of their God. They ask me for righteous judgments. They delight in the nearness of God. Why have we fasted, but you have not seen? We have denied ourselves, but you haven't noticed. Look, you do as you please on the day of your fast and oppress all your workers. Your fast with contention and strive to strike viciously with your fist. You cannot fast as you do today, hoping to make your voice heard on high. For will the fast I choose be like this, a day for a person to deny himself, to bow his head like a reed, and to spread out sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast and a day acceptable to the Lord? Isn't this the fast I choose, to break the chains of wickedness, to untie the ropes of the yoke, and set the oppressed free, and to tear off every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, to bring the poor and homeless to your house, to clothe the naked when you see them, and not to ignore your own flesh and blood? Then your light will appear like the dawn, and your recovery will come quickly. Your righteousness will go before you, and the Lord's glory will be your rear guard. At that time when you call, the Lord will answer. When you cry out, he will say, here I am. If you get rid of the yoke among you, the finger pointing and the malicious speaking, and if you offer yourselves to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted one, then your light will shine in the darkness, and your night will be like noonday. The Lord will always lead you and satisfy you in a parched land and strengthen your bones. You will be like a watered garden and like a spring whose water never runs dry. Some of you will rebuild the ancient ruins. You will restore the foundations laid long ago. You will be called the repairer of broken walls, the restorer of the streets. If you keep from desecrating the Sabbath, from doing whatever you want on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day a day of the Lord's honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, seeking your own pleasures or talking business, then you will delight in the Lord. And I will make you ride over the heights of the land and let you enjoy the heritage of your father Jacob, and the mouth of the Lord has spoken. This is a cry out to them. And what do you think the main point of this lesson is? Would you think it's the hypocrisy of the Jews? Would you think it's their hypocrisy in their worship? And he starts the chapter off by beseeching Isaiah to cry out loud like a trumpet. You know, there's several instances in the Bible when something always happens. It's a loud thing. We're marching around the walls in Jericho, and what do they do? Making a lot of noise. So obviously this word crying out and making noise, it's the same thing. He's wanting to really drive this home to the children of Israel, the Jews here, that their worship is not being what it should have been. He's being charged by God to reprove these Jews because of their hypocrisy. There's several instances in the Bible we know of where there was some hypocrisy in worship. You remember back where Jesus in Matthew 6 calls it to their attention that you come and you offer fast and alms and all this kind of stuff. But this seems to be a continuous theme almost in the Old Testament. And as we know, the Old Testament is given for our inspiration and doctrine. But you think about it, how many times in the Old Testament do we know of just things that they did with God being right there leading them every day? And sometimes like the simplest of commands, just like Cain killing Abel. Cain obviously knew what he was supposed to bring, but just chose to do it his own way. Then you have the swift judgment that happened to him. And then you have Nadab and Abihu, right? They knew what they were supposed to do. They've been directed exactly what to do. And what did they do? Offer strange fires. And that took care of that. And you know, even in the New Testament, about worship not quite being up to speed, you remember when the rich man came to Jesus, and he said, man, I go to church 2 times a week. I even go on Wednesday night. You know, I give more than 10%. Man, I am good. What else do I need to do? And what does the Lord tell him? Go sell everything you got and come join me. Well, that's a little bit more than we want to go now, right? That's a little bit further now, Lord. You know, you said in the old law 10%. But it's not the amount, was it? It was his heart. And the same thing we see over and over again. And then, not to be preaching, but every part of their worship was mentioned here. Their fasting, their giving, everything, right? We have 5 acts of worship, don't we? Male's been wearing that out. Matter of fact, we know we got 5. Any questions about it? Ask Matt. But we have a situation there where do we put too much importance on any one? We get here on Sunday mornings, and I hate saying this because I'm a victim of it too. We play church, don't we, sometimes? Because we're supposed to be here. But you know, we're supposed to be as focused with, as we would say, Act 1 of worship, Act 2, Act 3, Act 5. We're here to worship. We're not here to put one. We meet around the table, which is a center point of our worship service. But all of these others are acceptable parts of worship. And worship means paying attention, keeping our minds off of our earthly situations, which is very, very hard. And I feel like we all look at this chapter here that we got today and look at it in the eyes of our life. We're looking at a historical story here of the children of Israel and what they lacked in their worship, what they did, what their worship looked like, and we see what God expected their worship to be. Let's look at our worship today through the same eyes. Let's put us in this chapter and see how our worship service should be. Yes, sir.
Like you were saying earlier, how many times have we seen people that attend services long enough for the Lord's Supper to be served, and they got to go, once they do that, they think, okay, I'm good. Or, all those years ago, the congregation used to turn on the shepherd, we got those little trays to take communion to the hospital. That's the only act of worship those people participate in, but we've got to take it out.
We did that too. We'd go to the hospitals and nursing homes. Whoever wanted the communion, we'd offer them that little thing. And matter of fact, my own dad's over here at Homewood, and they'd bring it to him. He could have walked across the parking lot, went to church. But Dad did that. And sometimes that's convenience and everything else. I do support what you said. I remember, you know, they used to have communion like we do in here now at the first of the service. Well, some people would get up right then and leave. We wouldn't even be here to hear mail. I mean, you know, and then they got to having the communion at the end so they could keep This was the elders that healed you back. Dad was an elder there. And they would get out of the building and leave, as soon as communion was over. So they got to having communion at the end of the service. This chapter here, it tells of what their problems were as far as their beliefs and their fasting and the observance of the fast. We find lots of times in these lessons that the children of Israel appears to have never done anything right. I mean, does it not look like they're just a continuous mess up? I mean, we go up and down these hills and hollers all the time. They're up here, they're worshiping God, and then Moses goes up to get the Ten Commandments, and he comes back down, and they got a brass cow down here. I mean, how did they lose whatever they had in such a short time? How did they cross the Red Sea? How did they have all of this history in their minds? And then like this here, we was reading it, look, we've done everything, and then they asked God for righteous judgment. They mentioned that they've done all these things. Is it not funny when you say a prayer or your individual prayers and you ask for something and you don't get it? And you asked and you don't get it. And you keep doing this and you don't get it. Have you ever said, well, God, I guess you've really messed up, you're not listening? Is that not what they're saying right here? We've been asking you all these things here, making all these requests, doing these fasts. Man, we've been good folks, and we've been asking all this stuff to help us, and you've just given us a deaf ear. You ain't heard nothing. You ain't even paying any attention to us. It almost seems like they're in the language there, almost seems like they're calling God down or calling him to task, doesn't it? Like, why hadn't you done this? Has any of you ever been brazen enough to say, God, listen to me now, and be that brazen speaking to God? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? That you would address your holy Father God in heaven, who has done all of these things for your people, and then you question his faith and his promise and his righteousness and justice. Anytime, that's a point I was getting to a little bit later about acceptable worship. Boy, howdy. Some of the best parts of my day sometimes is when I'm through with work and I want to really get a good laugh out of life. I turn to Kenneth Copeland, watch a little of that, whatever that is, and to see the magnitude of people and how we've made, just like they were making their worship service what they wanted it to be, like David said. They wanted to set the rules. Are we not, or let's say not us here at Shays Mountain, but the religious so-called world out there, do we not see that's what they're doing? They're making the worship to please them. They're making it a tremendous emotional experience. And when you see, there was a video on YouTube the other day of Kenneth Copeland and Kenneth Hagin, two of the biggest, Pentecostals in the whole wide world. And they were taking that verse, they were drunk on wine, and instead of being drunk in the Spirit, it's in the New Testament, and he was saying that they were really drunk on the Spirit and had these people falling around all in the building and everything else. I mean, they have such a tremendous following. That's a gross exaggeration, I hope, from what they were doing here. But they were doing things, they were going through the motions, and these were not, this fast that we're talking about right here and their fast are not the one big fast that they were supposed to have. Now this was kind of something that was sometimes voluntary, done twice a week and all of that, but this was not like a feast of atonement or something like that. This is just their normal everyday feast. And it says they kept boasting that they had afflicted themselves, or they had hurt themselves, or they had suffered great consequences by doing these fasts and doing these sacrifices. And then they're not getting anything for it. So we have them being upset because they didn't get what they wanted. And the real reasons is a fast is to honor God, right? What is true worship? What does the Bible say? How do you define true worship? It's undefiled before God, is it not? And it's defined in Isaiah 1, verse 10 through 17. Some good verses on that if you want to read those. Matthew 15, 8 and 9 has some good verses on what the fast was and what they were to do and observe and all that. But the main thing was that God was looking for them was to lower themselves, to humble themselves, to be humiliating, not to be self-righteous. And they were definitely making themselves appear to be self-righteous. They had done all of the little outward deeds, so therefore they were justice in their mind, and they deserved all of their blessings. But this is plainly just hypocritical worship, is it not? The list of things that he required them to do is pretty much on the same thing that we're to do, is it not? We see the hungry, we're to feed them. We see somebody that needs clothing, we clothe them. Needs somebody that needs a home or somewhere to stay, we help them. Many of the things is the same thing that we're asked to do today. Are we doing those things? I got some clothes for you too, Doug. Take. But you know, just the small things here that they asked for, they were going about doing their regular business. They weren't letting, the yoke off of those that were burdened. And do we really believe in that verse right there that he's telling them that if somebody owes you something or somebody's got something on you, you're supposed to release that debt? You think he's saying it to that extent? That you're supposed to forgive a debt? There's 2 or 3 different people think it does. I don't think it means, I think it means take the oppression of the debt off of them. I don't think that means forgive them their debt, all of their debt. I believe it means don't be overbearing. Work with them. Now, do you see it that way, Rick? Do you think that's what he means, or do you think? I believe he means for us to all be responsible. But at the same time, if a brother is hurting a little bit and needs something, I think he calls for us to be compassionate. And I think that's the extent of that. Then it says that they should take care of anyone in need, anybody. It didn't matter. So there you go. Well, I don't know if we should help them. They're not members of the church. Boy, we hear that a lot. We got to decide, well, you need to talk to brother so-and-so. We got to take a vote to see if he's worthy of our help. We start doing this stuff. And I know, just because my dad was an elder for 1,000 years, we saw that a lot where people would come and you want to help everybody. You really do. But there are that segment of civilization out there that's going to take everybody for everything they can get and a little bit more. So I do believe there's a discretionary thing there that we have to watch out for. But it does mean that we are to be looking for opportunities. pray for an opportunity. Pray for an opportunity to make you a better Christian, a better American even, a better person. To look for that opportunity. And then if you do get taken advantage of, or somebody reads a rule book a little different than we read it, that doesn't mean you throw them to the fire. You work with these people. It's like I've told y'all before, we helped a lot of hungry people under the bridge for years down there. Sometimes you didn't even have to wear a gun, it was so safe down there. But you helped hundreds of guys that line up, kids and all, and you'd feed them, And I tell you for sure, I know of only 2 that we ever got. But what's those 2 souls worth? What is just 2 out of maybe 4 or 5 years of doing this every other week? I think so. How often? Was it every other week, lady? Okay. Debbie don't remember. But you know, so what is the value? To me, if we'd have just had one, it would save us that soul from hell and hide a multitude of sins. It would, and then what that one soul may have done is we could start at a math effect. Yes, sir.
The point that you're making there is not what the result is, it's what you got.
Yes.
I don't like when somebody leaves worship service and say, I didn't get anything out of worship.
Exactly. That's that right there. Like we said a while ago, coming in here and playing church, you walk out, well, boy, that sermon was really dry today. Well, I guess so. You was talking and thinking about everything else. You didn't even have your mind on what Jeremy's going to tell us about. And I'm going to stay awake the whole time. Oh, and if I don't, he'll probably call me out. Male can't call you out. He can't see that far back. Well, that doesn't matter. My uncle, he preached for 500 years, not 1,000 like Dad was an elder. But my uncle preached for 500 years, and he'd about halfway through the sermon, he'd say, "Are you listening?" And about everybody, doing this number, but beat on the pulpit. All ministers seem to have a thing. I think Mel's thing is he has a commercial break. Like I say, he'll be talking about something, then in the middle of, oh, by the way, our meeting last week in Pocahontas. Y'all know where Pocahontas is. Have y'all ever heard of Pocahontas, Arkansas? I mean, we can't have a sermon without hearing the latest from Pocahontas. I mean, I love him. I love Pocahontas. I ain't never even been there. I don't even want to go there, But we know about Pocahontas. But back to the thought, like David said, it's what you put into it is relative to what you get out of it. If you participate in the singing, and I know there's a lot of folks that say, boy, I can't carry a tune in a bucket. And I agree with them, they can't. But God thinks it sounds really good, don't He? Because they're going to be singing in the heavenly choir, are they not? So I know they're singing good because He loves it. So it must be me that's out of whack, right? But that's what we're supposed to do. Sing. Be participants in the service. Mentally, if not physically, we can be mentally attuned. The writer here, Isaiah, and that's another thing, a lot of people think some of Isaiah's, even Nehemiah may have written the last half of Isaiah. That's another little tidbit I throw in on the male comment. But, there was some discussion that maybe Isaiah wrote like the first half of the book, and then some of his students, Nehemiah, may have written the last half. There's argument, conversation both ways, but it does appear that I think he wrote it all. Now then, do you see what all God's going to do for these people if they just do what they're supposed to do? Look at those verses right there where it says, verse 8, He will return mercy after their great afflictions. These are things that He's going to do if they just go to church and do what they're supposed to do at church, right? If they have true worship, a true fast, Here's what he's willing to do for them. It seems like for everything that they got to do, he does 2 or 3 times more in return for them if they'll just follow his word. He'll put honor upon them. That's the second thing he says. You know what honor is? It's kind of like I was listening to one of the sermons this morning. I don't even remember which one it was. But anyway, he told the story of Robert E. Lee after the Civil War. And some guys wanted to have a product and sell a product and use his name, and they would pay him good money. Here's what Robert E. Lee said. He said, I lost my home in the war. I lost everything I have. All I have left is my name and my honor. Do you think I'm going to sell it to you? Is that not, that's all you got. So what's God going to do? He's going to give them, now you see how precious that honor was just in that little story I said. But you realize now what God giving them honor could mean. They would be respected for who they were as people, not for what they had, not for what they could get, but they would have the honor of surrounding people. They would be respected. That was one of the conditions of just having a good fast.
At the end of verse 8, one of my favorite passages in this particular scripture, where he says, I got your back.
Yeah.
I will be your rear guard. Do all this stuff, and glory to God will be your guard.
Yep, that was the next point. He was going to be safe and give them protection. And how many times did they have examples of that prior to this? I mean, you know, they've got the law, they've got the history books, they know what's happened about the Red Sea, they know how they've been saved from numerous pitfalls. So if anybody ought to know what the protection of God meant, it should have been them. They everything they did, as long as they were walking in the right, then they would be saved, and they would be no problems getting along with anybody else. It also says, in verse 11, that he would direct them in all their, let's say, doubtful times and all of that, kind of like giving them the peace, that knowing that as they live this life, they would have the continual protection, the continual support of God. And it would give them, another thing, would give them the satisfaction, the peace of mind to know that God was with them. In your life, when you put all your faith and trust in God, do nothing without God's help, realize that all help comes from above. All good and perfect gifts come from above. So should we not, in everything we do, ask God to be with us? And you know what? It's not like that bumper sticker said, God is my co-pilot. If he ain't flying the plane, buddy, he ain't in there. So you know what? You better have him, because there ain't nobody riding with you but the old devil if God ain't in there. So you realize that we need him every minute of every day. The strong times, the weak times. The times when we've done so good, we want to pat old Ronnie on the back and give him a big old hug and 3 attaboys and all that kind of stuff. We need him then to slap us down, to keep us where we need to be. And then when we're down here, we need him to build us back up, to keep us at a peaceful existence. That's the way he intended for our lives to be. He didn't want stress in your life as a Christian. And I think That's what he's promising these people here. If you'll just do what I've asked, then you'll have all of this. He even promises it to the next generation, does he not? He said, man, not only I'm doing this for your families, like we're going to push this on down the road even. He's promising them something in the future, not even for them. He's promising their children better lives. So obviously we know that would be dependent upon their children doing good, but at the same time, he's telling them, I will be with your generation and the next generation if you just continue to follow my rules. He ends this thing about what he'll do for them by saying that they would, or their ancestors would go back and rebuild the city. You know, by this time, Jerusalem's already been destroyed once already completely. And it's been partially destroyed 2 or 3 more times. And then it's an ongoing thing about the rebuilding of the city. And this is to refortify the whole nation, because at some point, most all of the major cities had been destroyed. And he promises that they'll pass this on, and that they would all continue to be prosperous in rebuilding the cities. But nothing that they did, nothing, should desecrate the Sabbath day. That's what his main point in the chapter is. Don't desecrate my day. Continue to beat into their heads again. Don't burden. Don't oppress. Be a servant to all. And to remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. That was his main concern in this chapter. He wanted them to honor the high places, the temple. He wanted them to observe the fast, and for their observance, he would do all of these things. In the book, we have a couple of things. I'm running out of time. He describes the manner of fasting that matters to God is, like we said, it's a pure fast. And he brings out a couple of things in the book about exploiting the help and exploiting all of that kind of thing. And that's what we touched on a while ago. But the God's blessings, as he stated, and we read that in Isaiah 58, 9 through 11. You have similar things in Proverbs 11, 24, in Matthew 11, verse 30. But what separates us from God? That's in chapter 59. What is the thing that separates us from God? Sin. And the only thing that kept these Israelites, Jews, from being able to enjoy the benefits of their worship services was sin. In the sin of hypocrisy. And you notice, by the way, it mentioned in there several times different sins, and there's one about malicious speaking or talking, gossip. And how many times have we read in the New Testament about gossip? Here they doing the same thing. They just like us. They just talking about everybody. How many of them got to get on the phone and talk about what brother so-and-so did at church? I didn't like that, what I did. Hey, these are our brothers. What is this about? Why do we need that? And it was like when I was growing up, if you want to know anything going on at church, you just call my aunt, because she had her ear to the ground. She heard all the dirt, she heard it all. And, if you're not careful, it might be some among us who want to share something that you really don't want to hear and don't need to hear, turn your back and just walk. You know, do something. You don't want to subject yourself to that stuff. That's what sows seeds of discord. It gets one talking about another and another about another, and then we all come and hug each other and all of that and just love on each other like we're just the biggest buddies, and we're going, I'm going to stab you back out in the parking lot. You know, or I saw you doing something. Why is Church of Christ people like that? And I'm sure we're not the only one that it holds that honor. I'm sure all of them do the same thing. But we're separate, set apart. We're supposed to be special. We're God's chosen people. Can we not love you, love you, love you, love you unconditionally?
I think the biggest reason we do that is because we don't love ourselves, because we know we have sin, we have fault. It's a lot easier, rather than to look at the fact that God is judging us, it's a lot easier to go judge somebody else and feel a lot better about, well, I'm better than they are.
That's a good point. And then I'm glad you, because I had forgot that. That was one thing I was going to bring up. We look at ourselves, I'm goody-goody, you know, and I'm looking at you, and I see something that I do good you ain't doing too good at, so you ain't as good as me. So it's like Jeremy says, it's a reflection of ourselves that we feel like, hey, we are maybe walking a little bit light into loafers over here on Christianity, you know. We may not be doing what we need to be doing. So I think, you know, sin has separated us from God, and it separates us. It separates us in so many ways, because it puts the sins on us, and by sins being upon me and you, and we can't live our life fully. Are we exuding the influence, the light to others that we should be? We're not. We're not. We have to have inside us this spirituality that makes others want to be like us. And we're not showing that if we're out here cheating, lying, stealing, oppressing the yoke on the weary, not helping anybody who needs help. If we're not doing these things that we've been told is acceptable, what God wants us to do, then all of these things that He's promised are not going to help us, and we're not going to be forgiven of our sins. So how can we help anybody else if we're not doing right? The lesson is yours. We got some very tough questions. We got 3 or 4 minutes here. I hope everybody has studied their lesson and got these questions all filled out. And we'll run over 2 or 3 of them. If y'all have got any comments, anything you'd like to say, I'm welcome for you to add it. Question 1. What did God instruct Isaiah to tell his people? What do you think about that, and Rick Hale? Yeah, that's what we talked about when we opened the class up. He wanted to make this sound like Isaiah was up on a big podium yelling this out. Boy, yell it out to where everybody can hear it. In other words, make it known. That was the main thing. Make it known. 2, what were the people doing to demonstrate their allegiance to God? They were fasting. They were doing the outward appearance of faithful worship. Fasting. Like Rick said. We're not saying it was acceptable worship at this point right here, was it? It was outwardly fasting, but God was not accepting it. Right? All right. Number 3. Why was God displeased with their actions? Doing it for that wrong reason. The whole thing. All right. How did God want His people to demonstrate their allegiance? Huh? He had numerous things they did. Help the poor, feed the hungry, house the homeless. Just anybody basically that needed help, they were to help. Number 5. What did God promise to do for those who obeyed Him? He'd hear their prayers. And then He lists all them other benefits. Boy, you do this, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. All they had to do is ask. That's basically all they had to do. Observe the fast correctly and just ask, and He's going to give it to them. Whatever they want, He's going to do it. I mean, this is a promise right here. And as the Bible says, God ain't slack concerning His promises. So we know if they're doing right, they're asking, He's answering. Is that not true? All right. The next one. What separates man from God? Sin. And then the last one there, what did Isaiah say sinful individuals did not know? Peace. Is that not what total commitment means? We talked about honor and all those other things briefly, but is that not what true worship and all that brings? Peace. And that's really what we want, isn't it? Peace. Peace. I enjoyed it. Thanks for the help. I made it through it. I was walking around on one foot.